staying away from straight plane movement. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, let's say I go to squat and I come up and I twist as I do my bicep curl. If I lift one arm up and then slowly bring it down. So differential movement is amazing for fascia.
All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Erin, and I'm going to be honest, this is take two for us because we recorded a whole episode and my whole hard drive crashed. And poor Erin's episode was a casualty. So we're doing it all over again. So we're going to make it even better than it was the first time because it was pretty amazing the first time. But Erin, thank you for being here again and jumping on and having a convo with us.
Well, I'm happy to be here and happy to continue our conversation from the first time.
Yes, for sure. Yes. So, Erin, as I mentioned in the intro, Erin is this fascia expert. And so I would love for you to just and you have your story I love, and I loved hearing about your story because I resonated with so much of it. I know so many people listening will as well, but if you can share your story of what got you into this world of fascia, it's this in this niche.
Yeah, happy to talk about my story. So I grew up as a dancer and an athlete. And through my trainings, I would stretch just as we normally do and typical workouts and things like that. And eventually I started pulling my right hamstring over and over again. So it was a repeat injury. And back then I didn't know why, and I have since learned why and understand it better. But essentially, I have a leg that's a little bit longer than the other, and I was twisting my pelvis to the right. So I had a right rotated pelvis. So it led me to have more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Vulnerability to injury in that particular leg. So kind of like a broken link that I didn't know was there. And so in overstretching, I would pull the hamstring and my body started laying scar tissue down as a way to protect me from overstretching and tearing the muscle off the bone. So I later started addressing my chronic pain issues, and I did everything from PT to chiropractic, massage therapy, acupuncture, Novocaine injections, cortisone injections,
Gosh.
anything and everything. And years later, I ended up working at a hospital in New York City in outpatient rehab. So I had all these amazing therapists working on me and trying to help me with this kind of dull, aching pain off my butt bone or my ischial tuberosity. And I'm getting MRI, which showed a ton of scar tissue buildup on both sides, but primarily my right side. So I had an actual confirmed fact that I had internal scar tissue. So the scar tissue was there to help me, and my body was trying to help me. But in turn, it disrupted how my hamstrings functioned, how they contracted or shortened, how my nervous system traveled through my right leg and other areas of the body. It disrupted my postural pattern. So I started kind of twisting up like a uh, wet rag that kind of dries
Mm-hmm.
up and stays in this kind of spiral. So then my
Mm-hmm.
left QL started hurting, my right scapula started winging, I started getting tension headaches on the left side of my neck, and so on and so on. And it was like this continued spiral of like fascial adhesions and blind spots, muscles that were not working, ones that were overworking. And I was in chronic pain and I was desperate to continue doing my active life, dancing, yoga, going for runs. And at the time I lived in New York City, and everything stopped because everything hurt.
Mm.
At the time, I was working with spine patients and people living with multiple sclerosis. And so I never honored my pain because I looked at it as something to not complain about. And that made things worse. And
Mm-hmm.
that settled in my body as well. And so I had a doctor that I value my relationship with him. He's wonderful. And he said, because he didn't know any different, he's like, Erin, there's nothing more you can do. He said,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of at the end of the road. You've tried everything and you've had some relief, but nothing stuck. He's like, the only thing I can say is we could go in and do surgery, scrape up the scar tissue, but then you'll have more scar tissue. So
Mm-hmm.
I gave up, and it was devastating. I felt like so much a part of my life was, gone in a way because I felt like this pain was going to be with me every single day of my life forever. And that was really sad.
Mhm.
So I moved on and moved back to Minnesota, got married, started a family, and then I ended up learning about resistance stretching and was curious about getting certified and continuing my education. So I went to get certified, not really thinking in terms of myself, but more to help my clientele that I was working with. And that first day, I had a massive healing moment where we were doing targeted work on the scar tissue on my ischial tuberosity on my right leg. And it felt like we were in a spot that I wished every needle would have gone, every
Mhm.
finger, every single
Mhm.
attempt was like, can you just push that one button and then
Mhm.
make it all go away?
Yes.
And I never thought that was possible. And here it was happening to me. And it felt like dried, hard duct tape being ripped off my bone in the most beautiful, wonderful way. It was like the skies cleared. I was bawling, crying. It took 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, we targeted the scar tissue to change just enough that all my pain sensation I was feeling, everything, all the sensations, interoception of what everything was happening melted away. And I just stood up and I knew my life had changed at that point.
Mhm.
And I bent over, touched my toes, and I was 100% pain free.
Oh my gosh.
And
In 10
then
minutes.
in 10 minutes time, I
That's
walked
crazy.
and cried for like an hour down the streets of New York City, which I had lived for 10 years and never walked the streets without pain.
Mhm.
I just couldn't believe it. And my life has been revolved around it ever since.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how could it not? What a powerful story. Your whole life changed in 10 minutes. Like, that's crazy. And for those who we've been talking about this already, but for those who are listening who maybe they've heard of fascia, maybe they haven't. I feel like everybody listening has probably at least heard of it, but may not know exactly what it is. Can you explain what fascia is?
Sure. So fascia is connective tissue in our bodies. It is a crystalline, fluid filled matrix of webbed fibers, collagen, elastin. It is the scaffolding that holds us up. So, most of history has focused on bones, muscles, ligaments, joints, tendons. And for a long time, fascia has been forgotten and dismissed until about 2007 and onward. And that's not where it first began, but there's, Ida Rolf, who did Rolfing a long
Mm,
time ago. But
mhm,
that's where people are like, wait a second, we got to look into this here.
mhm,
Because I think the people that started stepping into it just had these massive moments of healing, trauma, awareness, and through movement and body, and in a different perspective than what we were used to.
mhm,
And the research started exploding into what is this all about? And so we have found that fascia is a sensory organ. It's a sensory tissue because it has nerve ending receptors for pain and for proprioception. And I find that fascinating because for so long we think I have this trigger point and I have muscle pain.
mhm,
But really, more likely, it's the fascia in the area that's talking to the nervous system, talking to the brain, saying there's a problem here.
mhm,
And because fascia is webbed throughout the body, it touches everything. So everything's connected to each other. And so, more likely that the problem is arising from somewhere else in the body compared to where we're having pain.
mhm.
Because of fascial planes or trains or meridians in the body, we can make new connections and address the body in different ways outside of just the point where the problem is. So that's a general way to say it, but it's a massive web throughout our whole body that is our shape and our form. It has its own intelligence and its own capacity to conduct electricity and energy flow, and we're just starting to understand and learn about it.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me too. And it's funny you said that about the source of or where we feel the pain is and to be the source. And that was what was so surprising for me. So I don't know if you're familiar. I don't know if Erasti is like a nationwide thing or just a Texas thing, but it's just basically fascia therapy, like deep tissue and fascia therapy. But I started going a while back when I was a runner, and that was the weirdest thing for me because I would tell him, like, it was the first time I went in and I was telling doctor, like, this is where it hurts. And who he's working, I'm like, no, like, that's not where it hurts. Like, this is where it hurts. He's like, no, just trust me. Like, that was the craziest thing where I was like, wait a minute. And then, like you said, it's like you have these sessions where you're like, oh my gosh, where did the pain go? And he didn't even touch where I told him that it hurt. Like, it was crazy.
It's I mean, the person doing the work on me during my healing moment never touched my scar tissue.
That's crazy.
She never even was near it. She was
Yeah.
at my foot and ankle, and I was contracting my muscle that was associated with the scar tissue. And I kept it contracted as we moved it in the opposite direction or elongated it. And that basically gathers the fascia, adds tension to it, the muscle contraction, and it tugs on it. I like to say the fascia gets to go for a ride. And there was nothing, no
Yeah.
instrument, nothing touched the scar tissue,
Yeah.
but it changed dramatically in
It's
that moment.
crazy. It's so crazy. Well, and that was gonna be my next question. So when you're talking about this and the work that you do with fascia, can you explain what it is? Because you were saying like it's not like stretching, like so can you kind of explain what the process looks like when you're helping people with this?
Yeah, so it's quite opposite of stretching, and I have to have enough courage to be so bold as to say that, we should be stretching in a different way or don't
Mhm.
stretch the traditional way. So I do feel like there is a beautiful benefit to it if it's done safely, but there needs to be more conversation around that. But so instead of lengthening a muscle, feeling the stretch, holding it, breathing into it, trying to go further, you avoid end range. So this is incredibly important for those who live with hypermobility or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome because we are stretching past a point of and becoming incredibly vulnerable to injury because we don't have the gauge as to what's too much. And that's happened for all of us, and it can be different parts of the body might have that hypermobility or flexibility. So there's no risk of overstretching with this. So what happens is instead of stretching, you shorten the target area or muscle because it's never really one muscle, it's an area. And then fascia needs compression and tension to change. So we contract the shortened muscle against resistance. So whether it's against the floor, a wall, your own body, your hand, your arm. So you contract the shortened muscle and then you maintain the contraction through elongation. So you move in the opposite direction on a pathway opposing the resistance. And you can change up the pathway, you can add micro movements because when you're doing it, it feels kind of like a cross between a workout and a massage from the inside out. But there's a constant feedback loop because it's a closed chain exercise that's telling your brain what's happening, what you're feeling, are you in the right place or not? Is the nervous system able to talk to this area? Is this safe? Is this too far? So all of this bits of information are being relayed to you in a safe moment as you travel through the movement. And it's repetition. So it's not a held position. You relax, start again, and you continue in repetitions until you feel a change in the connective tissues.
Interesting. So what would be the difference? I've been wanting to ask you this. What would be the difference? So like for me, when I was going, the doctor I was talking about when I was going, he was a chiropractor, but he would do this fascia work. It was more like deep tissue, like manual stuff going on. So how is what you're doing different than like manual therapy when they're like, digging in there?
There's some similarities to it, and I
Mhm.
actually do teach people how to do some self manual work.
Mm,
I, I'll use the balls and I'll
yeah.
use the
I was
hubs
gonna
and
ask.
I'll use the
Mhm.
foam. I'll use these things as a complement.
Gotcha.
I believe that when that's happening, it's amazing for the practitioner because they can feel, yep, there is a congestion of tissue or scar tissue. They can feel it and they'll know, and that's really important information. And
Mhm.
it helps to guide the work in important ways to help that patient or client. Um, I believe that it helps to bring blood flow, awareness to the area. I This is not scientifically proven, but just from having work done, both massage therapy and deep fascia work, PT, OT, all of those things help. They do.
Sure.
The only thing that's ever changed permanently during, especially my healing moment, was because the scar tissue changed. And to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, I don't know if you can just push on it,
Mhm.
change it, but you can
Right.
nudge it.
Mhm.
So I think that there's a place for all of it, and
Yeah.
there's benefits in all ways, and each person's going to benefit from a different modality.
Mhm.
What I love about the work I teach is that I can do it with you, and our nervous systems are just on par with each other. It's just this constant back and forth energy reading, which guides me a lot in my treatments. But then everyone can do it on their own without the need of a practitioner, without all the equipment. Anyone can do this if you have a yoga mat, a place to sit in a chair, anywhere in the world, inside, outside, it doesn't matter. And it's available to you as you need it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the more beautiful things about having the opportunity to teach this type of fascia work is
Mm-hmm.
everyone can do it.
Yeah, yeah, the accessibility of, I mean, that's an important piece of it for sure. So when we're talking about the fascia, so you're explaining like what it is, how it is in the body. So what causes, I know this is, I mean, this is kind of a big question, but you can answer however you want. But what causes, I guess maybe the major ones, like what causes us to have all these issues with the fascia?
There's a ton of issues that can arise. I'll just kind of highlight a few. My biggest lesson, I would say, in all my years in doing this, in learning from people's bodies who have a malfunctioning nervous system, is our habitual postural patterns and movement patterns that are repetitive and repeated. So the big picture is that fascia adapts to the demands on it. And a good example that I like to share is if you think of when a baby's born, they are not walking yet. And so their connective tissue is supporting them as a baby. And eventually their fascia starts to help support the muscles and the structure to hold the head up, and then to sit up, and then to stand. So if you think about an Achilles tendon in a newborn, Achilles tendon at the heel going up the back of the calf, in us as adults, we're like, whoa, it's a thick, strong, like tendon. Holy cow, right? There's so much force that's happening through that tendon to stand upright, to walk, to run. But a baby doesn't have that and they don't need that. So their Achilles tendon is not the Achilles tendon of an adult because they don't have the demand or the need for it yet. The more they stand, the more they walk, their brain's registering the change, the mechanical forces throughout the body. It's signaling for that tissue and that tendon to change and become more supportive of their body and their movements. So that's what happens. So when we start to get older and we start to grow, even as kids, I work with a ton of kids and like young athletes, those patterns are present. If someone has a bone that's a little bit longer, like I did, my tibia is a little longer, I'm going to grow up with a slight leg length discrepancy. If I am right hand dominant or left hand dominant, I might favor that side more. So I get more developed in my muscles on that side versus the other. I might have a pelvis that starts to rotate. And what happens is that we become more and more asymmetrical, which we all are, we always will be. The goal isn't perfect symmetry in the body because it doesn't exist. But what ends up happening is we develop vulnerabilities. So our fascia will support the muscles that are overacting and our structure in that area and spread out through the body. And also these other areas where the muscles then become inhibited and they stop working as well. I see this a lot with like the glutes. So typically the glutes, someone will have a really strong glute cheek on one side, it's nice and full and developed, and the other side's like, where is it? The muscle's not developed, it's kind of flat, and the nervous system's trying to talk to it, but it's having such a hard time. And so these inconsistencies, I think, lead to fascial conditioning to be healthy and unhealthy in some areas where adhesions start to build up. Overstretching is a big area. When we overstretch, we get microscopic scar tissue that gets laid throughout the muscle itself,
Mhm.
as a way to protect us from overstretching. And then in turn, as we age, we get more stiff, we get more tight, we get more achy. And so with this work, I like to think about it as reversing the age of the connective tissues from the inside out. And
Mm.
so, and so certainly some diet stuff comes into play, and you probably know a lot more about that than I do. And hydration of fascia isn't just about drinking water, but it's the movement that helps to nourish the fascia,
Mhm.
the lubrication, the hyaluronic acid production, and the fluid
Right.
distribution, and so on. So those are just some things, but repetitive, habitual patterns of posture and movement that lead to inconsistencies in the body.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And that's, I mean, that's pretty much, we do Pilates training at my studio and we talk a lot about postural deviations and stuff. And that's pretty much what we talk about too. And people come in with imbalances, it's usually because of that. And I love what you said about like the perfect symmetry of the body. Like it's not going to happen, but we can, do things. And that's that was going to be my next question because, I know for us, at least in Pilates, it's what we do a lot of unilateral stuff to, keep balance on both sides. So do you have like recommendations or strategies or whatever to help prevent that like these deviations that are causing the damage to the fascia?
Yes. So if someone was just going into it and stepping into some of like the programs that I teach and classes and stuff like that, and they don't have any pain points, I have yet to meet a human who doesn't, but it would be an overall system approach. So you'd be looking at fascia as a whole and just maintaining its health and improving its conditions so that the nerves live happily in their pathways and the blood vessels and all of that. So, but if you're dealing with a chronic issue like a back problem or a shoulder problem and so on, what I like to do is kind of be a fascia investigator. And so then I start to map out people's posture and I start to discover certain things about them and help them to make these connections themselves because they're really their best teacher and provider always. And what they're feeling inside their body I can't feel. I can maybe guess or help them evolve what's happening. But then you can get more specific. So in the beginning then you can almost get a prescription of movement.
Mm.
So I like to talk about despiraling. I talked about how my body was like
Mhm.
a wet rag that dried
Mhm.
twisted and start to untwist that wet rag.
Right.
So it might mean that you identify that doing a particular movement or fascia stretch to one side feels like easy peasy, no big deal. This feels natural. You do the other side and it's like, what body am I in? Like it feels completely wacko and you're like, I don't even know how to do what I did on the other side.
Mhm.
In the effort to try that neuroplasticity, that brain saying like, okay, how do we get there? That feels kind of like it. It's still different, but it feels more similar. That repetition in rebuilding up kind of how the body works on both sides is a really good approach. Um, Staying away from straight plane movement. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, let's say I go to squat and I come up and I twist as I do my bicep curl. If I lift one arm up and then slowly bring it down. So differential movement is amazing for fascia.
Mm.
It helps the joint stay healthy as long as you're protective
Mm.
while doing it. So yeah, you can then identify muscles that aren't working so well. And it's not just about fascia stretching. Sometimes it's more about teaching the muscle to shorten well again, to have the nervous system talk to it better again. So it can be two different stories on each side of the body. So it's depending upon what happens as the person steps into it. But those are just
Yeah.
some strategies.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say, because you said this at the beginning, you were talking about you and your personal story, how you were a dancer, and that's my background too. I know we talked about that last time. And, we think about and it's kind of, in one sect of the fitness world, it's kind of this training. We want long, lean muscles, right? So we're talking about like flexibility and long muscles and all this, but then you're talking about, well, it has to be able to shorten too. Like there's these, it's like both ends of the spectrum. We can't just focus on one part of that.
Right. And that's why I think Pilates is so amazing because I feel like there's more focus on a particular area of the body in the muscle shortening than a lot of other
Right.
method movements, and that's the paraspinals.
Yep.
Because we're in flexion, our spinal flexion so much because we're sitting, we're on computers, we're at desks, we're at tables, we're in cars. Our frontline fascia is short, and the back line fascia, not always in every place, but think of the back as like a C-shaped curve, right? And so
Right.
these paraspinals are always on, they're always taut, they're always lengthened. So that when we lift up, I have this technique that I call sternum up, and it's not a back extension, but it's just shifting the sternum like someone's lifting it
The
up.
lift. Mm-hmm.
Shoulders fall back, the head falls back. But then I take it a step further and I say to people, now visualize first with your eyes closed, the paraspinals, the muscles on either side of the spine, shorten. And then when they're shortened, then contract them. And so they're just in one place and they're just trying to contract these paraspinals.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden it's like, wow, I didn't think I could do that, but I felt that.
Mm-hmm.
And so changing that conversation of let's have the muscle shorten just as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lengthen.
Totally. Yes. No, I love that. Well, and I mean, everything you're saying is right. I'm at like, it's like, it's the mind body connection, right? Like we're telling them because, and I think people, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of times, and I do think it's maybe more in the conversation now because Pilates has gotten pretty popular. But yes, I love Pilates because there's the equal focus on the eccentric and concentric movement and all of that. But I think a lot of times people sleep on the mind body connection because it doesn't have to be just when you're doing Pilates or yoga. Like it can be when you're lifting weights or but I think people miss out on that when it's like when you're intentionally telling what parts of your body to do what, like it's like telling your body to do certain things. I don't know. I feel like that's such a big part of keeping even fascia, of course, but the whole body healthy is being able to feel. And like you're saying, when the people have these light bulb moments where they feel it, like, oh, I'm telling this my body to do this, and then it does it. Like I feel like a lot of people sleep on that mind body connection.
I'm really glad you brought it up because I think there's opposing thoughts with this,
Hmm.
where a lot of therapists and trainers are like, we want the muscles to contract automatically. And I do
Mm,
too. I do too, and I wish that they all did. And their approach is to get them to contract automatically. We're probably just fine.
right.
But I have found in my experience in working with people virtually in person myself is the route for me is to like, okay, my left glute I know isn't working as well. How can I turn it on? Let me try different ways so I can at least feel it, that feeling of embodiment, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, I feel that. And it's like this relief almost, like it's still there.
Hmm.
And I talk about this. I just actually talked about this recently today. I call this idea or method the surge. And what it is like, okay, so the left glute's not working. Fascia's connected everywhere. And maybe if I contract up the chain somewhere else, it will ground me, ground my nervous system, set the stage for the glute to do better, to try to show up more. So a
Hmm.
lot of times I'll take the focus to the middle body, to the transversus abdominis, which is a deep abdominal core muscle that wraps around like a corset. And I have a course that I teach on this because I find it so valuable to have education on it and to be able to have a relationship with it so you can use it in your body. So moving up the chain, engaging the TA sometimes will set the stage for then the nervous system to be like, okay, now I got the glute,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Now I can get there. So for me, that route just works well, and I've seen it work well for others. But there's many ways to approach that.
Yeah.
The muscles contracting automatically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, in a perfect world, we'd love for that to happen. But I just know, I mean, teaching Pilates for almost 20 years, it's like it doesn't always work that way. And a lot of times, well, and I think that's too, I mean, not to keep toot my own horn with Pilates, but I'm throwing out Pilates there. Y'all should all be doing Pilates. Because I agree with you. I think and that's, the big focus in Pilates is the TA. And it's like connecting with that helps you connect to all these other parts of the body. Yeah. And I mean, there's a huge part of the anatomy piece of our teacher training that we talk about that, but I do think it's well, and I think too, I feel like that thought process, well, yes, would be ideal. Like we could just connect with things automatically. I just don't think it's very practical in the world we live in, where like you were just talking about, we have people who sit for 7, 8 hours a day at a desk or whatever. It's just and people have traumas and injuries that I just think that it's like there's too many variables that prevent all of us from being able to just turn it on like that. And I think like having those strategies like you're talking about, like helping people connect is such a valuable thing. Well, and I think that's also the power of this fascia work that you're talking about. Because I know we talked about this last time, and I'd love for you to just kind of speak on it because, I like to throw in the woo every now and then because that's what I like to do. But I love how at the beginning you were talking about how the fascia is connected to everything. Like it's one web in the body just like every other part of the body, right? Like, conventional medicine tells us that we have like everything is separate and we go to this doctor for this and this doctor for this. And we know now that that's not how the body works, where we can't compartmentalize parts. And it's the same with the fascia. And so I feel like there's another layer to this that's like, yes, it's helping our physical body, but it's literally connects to everything. Like it is deeper than just like movement in the physical body, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the connections. I mean, one of the things I always love to talk about with that are your organ systems, your
Mm,
visceral fascia, the fascia that encompasses and suspends your organs. Um, that plays a significant role in how your organs function. It also there's ties to traditional Chinese medicine. I
mhm,
think was we were talking about that as well. And so, when you look at embryology and the development of a fetus and um, cells divide and these folds start happening, and they are talked about as fascial meridians in the body, even in similar aspects as the acupuncture meridians, and even the chakras and things like that.
mhm,
So, there's a lot of different maps out there of these fascial planes and meridians. Anatomy Trains has, the fascia trains, and when you look at it, that's why some people in the Western world will equate, well, why does acupuncture work? It could be that when you put a needle in your ear or your finger or your ankle, it's tied to the meridian that's tied to a fascial line that,
mm.
it talks to that organ system.
Such a
Well,
good
in the
point.
same sense, you can fascia stretch that same meridian
Right.
and affect the organs in a beautiful way. And you can work with anxiety, you can work with heart health. You can look at it in so many different perspectives. I work a lot with anxiety, and I work a lot with nervous system, regulation, and various things. So there isn't just like, oh, I have a knee problem and I can fascia stretch and feel better.
Right.
um, and then an emotional component to it. In times
Yeah.
of trauma, our bodies kind of hold the position, and fascia takes a snapshot of us during those times of trauma, and it holds us,
Mm.
and it tries to protect us and shield us, but it doesn't always know when to release,
Let
let go.
go. Mhm. Mhm.
So this can help with that too. And there's many times where someone will walk into my room for the first time, and I will know to say to them, sometimes people cry
Mhm.
unexpectedly. And if that happens, this is a safe place. And almost every time I've mentioned it to someone, they have cried.
That is crazy. There's a gal I follow on Instagram. Um, she's like a movement specialist, but she's been posts. I've seen a few posts the past few days, and she's talking about like your psoas and the fascia around your psoas and how so much trauma like gets stored in that part of the body. And she was mentioning something too, like a lot of times when people finally release that, it's just like this emotional. And I think again, just us in the Western world, just compartmentalizing the mind and the body. I think that's a huge piece that people also don't realize that it's like, I mean, yeah, the fascia part is affecting our movement and mobility and things, but the fact that like emotions, like energy is being stored in those, tight spots and sticky spot. I mean, that's a big opportunity for healing for people.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the conversation is going to keep evolving around that, but there's some practitioners like, no, we don't hold our emotions in our body, and some of them are fascia instructors too and
Mhm.
teachers. And so there's a lot of different schools of thought, but I think the big picture is what you said, just the mind body, and just in those moments when you're feeling your body, it's like this relief almost. I will sometimes compare it to what it feels like having a weighted blanket on you. When you contract your muscles through movement or through stretching, um, it's like, oh my God, there I am. You can almost
Mhm.
yourself feeling at home in your body again. It gives people the opportunity to trust their body again, to feel safe. And those are all emotional aspects at work.
Mhm.
So there's, yeah, I mean, feeling secure in your body or just being like hopeful again, which is a great way. That's one of the big things when I first did my first course on daily Om, which was a huge success because people were ready for it. They were ready
Yeah,
for something other than a regular stretch class.
right.
And when they tried it, the responses I got from around the world, it blows my mind. If I'm ever having a bad day, I look at this and
Mhm.
all these people that have written to me and said, I have hope again. And that was the thing
Mhm.
coming up over and over again. Like, this is different. I feel different. I woke up and I didn't have a headache today, or I slept good, or like my 10 years of a hitch in my knee like is gone. And
Mm.
I can't predict that stuff. And
Sure.
that, what's going to happen. Each person's different. But um And, people have asked me, like, why do you think that course was so successful? And I'm like I said, number one, people were ready for fascia, and fascia's in the title, and
Mhm.
people were ready for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then number two, people tried it and they were like, wait, what is happening
Mhm,
here? Like,
mhm.
how do we not know about this?
Right,
Which is how
right.
I felt, like total deer in headlights. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna send this out to the world in whatever way I can.
100%. Well, I feel like too, and this, may or may not be the right verbiage, but I just feel like because I mean, you clearly take this kind of trauma-informed perspective and creating a safe space for people, but I feel like, as and I love a good stretch, but like just looking at it compared to stretching, I just feel like the fascia work is kind of a more trauma informed way to work with the body. Like you were talking about people wanting to feel safe in their body. I almost feel like the fascia, what you're doing with the fascia work is just a more trauma formed informed way of helping the body versus stretching. Because I know a gal I had in my podcast a while back. She was talking about she's a trauma informed movement specialist, so she teaches like Pilates and yoga, trauma informed. And we were talking about that, like stretching for some people, even it can sound bizarre, but stretching for some people can induce trauma, like that it doesn't feel safe, basically. And so, yeah, I just feel like that the fascia work is just it allows that sense of safety back in the body. I feel like that's an important part of it.
Yeah, yeah. When I do yoga or Pilates or stretch, I teach mat Pilates as well. I take it upon myself to do it slightly different. So when I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing yoga, rather than getting into the pose as deep as I can, wherever my body's limits are, I contract my muscles as I'm getting into the pose, and I
Mm.
always hold off to my end range.
Mhm.
And then as I transition, like, if I'm in warrior two to reverse warrior, I'm adding directional resistance as I'm doing it, just
Mm.
on my own. And I've
Mhm.
tried not to do it to see what it feels like to do it the way I used to. Can't do it. I'm like,
Yeah, that's crazy.
and I like the feeling of a stretch too. And
Sure.
I do think it's okay to do it. I just don't think trying to go past where your body's telling you to stop is a good idea.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree with that. So for those listening who this is resonating and they're like, wait a minute, I clearly need some fascia work. What are some like things that we can do on our own? Obviously, we'll be able to look at your site and look at all your courses and things. What are some things we can do at home that can help with either like healing things that need to be released or whatever, and just, keeping that healthy fascial web.
Right. So the one thing I can say without having to like do a whole fascia demonstration and how you do the fascia stretching would be to be aware of your habitual patterns again, like we've
Mm,
talked about. For example, I love this example. I use it all the time, but years back, I was struggling with a lot of neck pain, and it was tension headaches that always started on the left side of my neck. I could feel the trigger point or whatever. One fun fact, I'm just going to interject for a second. Gil Headley is this amazing anatomist. If you don't know him and you're interested in anatomy, look him up because he is a peach. He is amazing.
okay.
Anyway, he recently was saying in one of his interviews was that he has done probably 1,000 different cadaver dissections in his career, and he shares a lot of information. And he says there are no trigger points in cadavers. And I was like, "Wait,
Interesting.
what does that mean?" And he's like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, like, does someone, pass away and the trigger point that's in their trap just dissolve, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is it? And so there's so much like, why do you always have pain in the same spot?
Mhm.
So, there's more to say on that, but I just thought that was an interesting
Yeah, it
fact.
is interesting.
But for me, I'd always keep my head cocked to the left when I was sleeping at night. So I'd be on
Mhm.
my head would be to the left, my neck headaches were on the left side. And I realized this was a pattern, or I call it the pocket, that I live in, sleep in every single night. So if you go back to fascia, it evolves to the demands on the body, it adapts to the body. So my
Right.
fascia now was supporting me in the structure of my head, where I'm short on my left side, long on my right side, every night, hour after hour after hour. So when I made that discovery, I'm like, holy cow, I'm just feeding into the same problem. What
Mhm.
I did is change my head position to the other side, which
Mhm.
felt wacky, it felt
Mhm.
weird. It did not feel natural, but I stayed there as long as I could. And then I'd come out, I just keep coming back to it. And I did this every single night for 6 months plus, still do this. And all of a sudden, I would realize I'm like, wow, like I can sleep with my head to the right and it feels possible, accessible, and somewhat natural. And
Mhm.
at the same time, the same click that was in my neck forever kind of diminished or almost non-existent.
Wow.
My
Yeah.
headaches almost gone. And I did
Wow.
other work involved with it, with my traps, my subscaps, and other things too. I have a neck program that I kind of based off of this, but that's something that everyone can do right away is to identify certain patterns, what leg you stand on dominantly, and always toggle between the two or give the other one more effort, how you cross your arms, your legs. And it's just changing your habitual patterns and postures to the exact opposite as often as you can.
Mm.
That will help to start to change the architecture of the fascial matrix.
Mhm.
So that's just one quick one to.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That makes total sense. I feel like that too, and because I also know I have a really crappy pillow, so I think that's the other part of it. But I've noticed that too, and it's like when you try to tell yourself to do it the other way, it does feel so unnatural. It's like when you're a dancer and you're like, do a left pirouette. Like, what? My body doesn't work that way. It's like telling your body to do the opposite is just crazy. But I feel like it's also like probably good for your brain, like doing things the other way and making it. So that makes total sense. I like that tip. That's a good one.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, okay, as we wrap up, I have one more question I'd like to ask you that I like to ask everybody. But let everybody know where they can find out more about you, your courses, everything you're doing, all of the things.
Yeah, so I have a new website. It just was rebranded and it's www.dailyfascia.com. I have an Instagram, I have a YouTube, which is going to evolve with the new brand and get prettier.
Mhm.
I have a membership on Patreon, which is where is my community of people um, that have access to all of my video content. So YouTube's kind of my older stuff that lives there, but all my new content, all my live classes that are done weekly, all sorts of different topics. People can say, hey, do something for the knees. And I'll just, the next week, I'll do a video because they asked. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all on Patreon, and there's a couple different tiers, like a $20 tier that has access to all the videos, and then a $30 tier that does live classes with me and
Awesome.
Q&As and
Yeah.
and then I have a couple courses on my website. I have one called the 5-Day Fascia Fix, which is an intro to the work, which is where I encourage people to begin. It teaches them a fascia activation for each muscle area of the body. And then I have the Express Fascia Miracle, which is five half an hour full body classes that's based off my 2 week Fascia Miracle on Daily Om. And then I have a neck pain relief course that's just targeting fascia work as it pertains to the neck pain. And then I have one on the transversus abdominis that is on my website too. So,
Nice.
and then I have one for the nervous system coming up. So there's a kind of an a la carte course option on my
Yeah.
website. I do virtual
Awesome.
sessions and in person, and yeah, happy to.
So many things. Yes, I love it. I love all the courses, all so many options. And all of that'll be in the show notes, y'all. So you can find it there and go check out. I mean, the Patreon membership, like that's like a no-brainer. Like go learn all the things and just do all that. Yeah, that's so easy. So good.
Actually, all the courses are on there for free except for the neck relief course, I think. They're
Nice.
in the Patreon too. So if you just
Yeah.
did check them all out. Yeah.
Get all the things. Yeah, I love it. That's perfect. So easy. Okay, so check out the those links and go look at all the things that Erin is doing. So Erin, the last question I want to ask you, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
I think it might go back to embodiment. Because if you don't know where you are in your own body, it's hard to project yourself in ways that feel purposeful to you outside of yourself. So finding a way to come back to yourself, there's never going to be an opportunity where we're always quote regulated or always, balanced. We don't live in a world that allows for that, but we can practice coming back to that and being safe in our body and feeling connected to ourselves, both mind and body, so that we can be the best version of ourselves to put out there into the world whatever it is you desire.
I love that. That's so good. Thank you, Erin. And thank you for sharing your time again with us. This is so good. I mean, there's just so much to talk about here. I feel like we could talk for hours, but you have so much goodness to offer people with all these things between your Patreon, this workshops, and your like all like y'all go check out all of this stuff. Like I feel like I mean, I love these stories when I can have people on the show that are like a full testimony of their own work. Like you've lived this and like you're talking about speaking of embodiment, like this is you embodying like this experience and this transformation you had and you're bringing this to the world. Like this is life-changing stuff for people. And I am grateful for you and thank you for, you know, taking that the leadership of like stepping out into that and owning that and making this your body of work. So thank you for what you're doing and how you're helping people.
Well, thank you so much, Hope, and I feel the same about you and what you're doing as well. So thank you for
Thank you.
having me.
Of course.